Well, good day to all of you joining us. It's a very pretty day here at Mount Vernon. The sun is shining, but the leaves are beginning to turn, and I've been enjoying having all of our company returning to our beloved home. In fact, I've been gathering together some things for in a few weeks I'll be welcoming company to come for tea. And I hope if you are able that you can come and join me October 17th. And my friends will make sure you got everything you need to know to join us. I have been reflecting on the great joy that company and visitors bring to us at Mount Vernon. I was brought up on a plantation, rather isolated, so whenever company came, it was very exciting. And at Mount Vernon, I was always looking forward to when my sister Nancy would come, or our dear friends, the Fairfaxes and the Carlyles. And fortunately, I was brought up very strict by my mother. She taught me how to lay by, to preserve and dry, pickle, smoke, salt, and cure to make sure you've got enough food to lay out a bountiful board. Today, of course, I don't do that work myself. I oversee it done, but our larder is full. We had an excellent harvest this year. So I am so looking forward to welcoming some friends in a few weeks' time. Some of the visitors that we have been family and our neighbors. I mentioned the Fairfax, Mr. Mason and his lady used to come a great deal. Again, to have one's friends and loved ones about is a very great joy. Now, don't be shy. I tend to talk a great deal without stopping, and that's terribly uncivil. Oh, I mentioned being a girl growing up in the country. When father would have visitors come, he would warn them against me. Have a care of our Martha, he would tell our guests. If you only inquire of the girl, he said, Miss, what is the hour? She'll tell you how the whole clock is put together. And I'm afraid I've never conquered that terrible habit. So if you have questions that you want to know about our company here or anything else, I'm very happy to answer them. Is there anything just yet, my dear?
Not quite yet, but Avery says, I love your dress.
Oh,
Would you mind telling us a little bit about your dress?
yes, well, I'm very fortunate to have an excellent local seamstress, Mrs. Brown, and she has had this gown made up for me and cotton printed with purples and reds. I thought that looked very well with the red petticoat. Again, and now that the war has ended, the general is most interested in seeing the increase of manufacture and industry here in this country. Of course, before the war, nearly everything was sent over from England, but the general would like to see more of that done. And so I was happy to have Mrs. Brown make this up for me.
All right, so we're getting a few questions coming in. Somebody asked Mrs. Washington, what is yours and Mr. Washington's favorite food?
Well, of course, we are in the season for the general's favorite dish. He likes the oysters. Oft times you'll see him standing on the east lawn with his spyglass, looking downriver. He's waiting to see if the oyster man is coming up with his bounty from the Chesapeake. Now, for me, I think the chief delight in living in the country is fresh vegetables. We still have a good deal of lettuce growing, some that can survive these cooler nights. And I like to make up Mrs. Taylor's salad dressing. It's a simple receipt. Take 4 or 5 eggs and boil them hard. Take the yolk and in a bowl mash that with equal parts oil and vinegar and grind some black pepper. Dress your greens in that, and it's very refreshing. Of course, every lady in Virginia prides herself on the quality of her smoked hams, and I am no different. Here at Mount Vernon, we cure about 400 hams every single year. And I have one selected each morning. It takes some hours to boil it and get it cooked. There was one memorable day when I did not have a ham served on table, however. I had gone into the dining room and was inspecting everything. As mistress of Mount Vernon, I not only choose what will be served on the table, I sit at the head of the table, dish everyone up, I carve. Well, I looked round the room, and there was no ham. And I asked Frank, and he is butler at Mount Vernon, Frank, where's the ham? Why has it not been brought from the kitchen? And he didn't like to tell me, I'm afraid. It turned out that Vulcan, who was one of the general's hunting dogs, got into the kitchen and snatched the ham off the table, ran off with it, and everybody chasing him with brooms and things. Oh, I was furious. When I told the general what had happened, oh, he threw his head back, he clapped his hands, he said, my dearest, the scene sounds charming. You'll notice when you come to visit us at Mount Vernon that no longer are his hunting dogs' kennels up near the house. I didn't want to lose another ham. But of course, we like sweets as well, and I am already thinking, oh, it'll only be a few months' time before I must gather up everything to prepare the great cake. Lucy and Doll are cooks here at Mount Vernon, and I supervise their labors, but I make up that great cake myself every year. And it's no small feat. 40 eggs, 4 pounds of sugar, 4 pounds of butter, 5 pounds of flour. And to that we add candied fruit peels. And well, it's baked a little ways before it's served. Once it has baked and cooled, you want to douse it every day for about 5 days with brandy before putting the icing on. So those are some of the cheap things that we enjoy here at Mount Vernon.
Sounds delicious. I'm getting hungry. It is lunchtime. All right, Tammy has a question. Was it usual to have treats with tea?
Well, in general, we like to serve a little bit of bread and butter. The tea most often served in the evening, about 7:30. But of course, if I have friends coming to call, particularly if they have traveled hard, I'll ring for tea and have some refreshment. We like Queen Anne cakes with the raisins of Shrewsbury cakes. Uh, we'll have some of those served as well.
Very good. Tammy has another question.
Yeah.
Did you have teas with officers' wives during your times in winter encampments with substitutes?
We did indeed. I was very honored that I was able to go and be with the general in the army during the war, but I was not the only lady there. There were the wives of other officers. There were also the wives and sometimes daughters of the enlisted men. The women kept that army on its feet, you know. And at headquarters, I would sit over a very modest tea table, not like the days before. It was all very grand. And indeed, because we supported the Patriot cause, we had substitutes. Once the tea that had been legally procured ran out, we mixed raspberry leaves, different herbs and things. And it wasn't quite the same. But with every sip, we knew we were supporting that cause so very dear to us. I'll never forget that there were some ladies come to Valley Forge. They were in Philadelphia, and their husbands, who as Quakers would not swear to an oath, had been imprisoned, and they came to seek the general, see if that could be changed. Well, I did sit them down and serve tea for them. I felt very much for their plight. So most certainly we did enjoy that. What truly is the important part of sitting around a tea table. We enjoy the toothsome delights made in the kitchen, the tea in the cup, but it is spending time with our friends and our loved ones to gather around to spend time together.
Excellent. And Denise asks, what pastimes and hobbies do you enjoy?
Well, I was brought up, as most girls are, to be a perfect mistress of my needle. And mother taught me plain sewing. Of course, little girls have sharp eyes and nimble fingers, so I spent a good deal of my childhood mending bed sheets and hemming tablecloths. But of course, we like the fancy work, the embroidery. I'll never forget teaching my little Patsy her first stitches. She was making her pocket, and to help her learn that very important work. And I enjoy quilting as well. I also, while I am at my needle, enjoy being read to. That's often how you'll find the general and I, particularly if we've no company. There in our parlor, before the fire together, I at my needle, he reading aloud. We were reading recently Mr. Stern's book the history of Tristram Shandy. So novels are read aloud from the newspapers as well. And of course, in Virginia, they say that dance is our dearest diversion. And I'm getting a little rusty, but the general is still the finest dancer in all of Virginia. And to hear music, we like the songs from the ballad plays, the Beggar's Opera. So there are many entertainments to enjoy, particularly in the evenings.
Sounds lovely. All right. Scarlett asked, could you tell us about meeting George Washington for the first time? What was your first impression?
Well, it was quite uh, an unusual situation, all the will of divine providence. I was a young widow overseeing a vast estate that my first husband left behind. And I had two little children, my son and daughter were under the age of 3 when their father died. I was a busy lady overseeing all that. And I was invited, it was the spring of '58, to visit my dear friends, the Chamberlains. And while I was there visiting, it happened that a young soldier was riding to Williamsburg. Now, he was then Colonel Washington. He was never near the capital in those days. He was out fighting the French in the wilderness. But as he crossed the Pamunkey River on the ferry, who did he meet but Major Chamberlain? And the major invited him home, insisted that he stay the night. So we became acquainted. The next morning, the general asked if he could call upon me at my own home, and I told him it would be most agreeable. And that within 2 visits he had made his offer, and I accepted that I had found in him not only an agreeable partner, but a father for my 2 children. Jackie and Patsy never had to be reminded to think of him as their father. They called him dearest papa from the very first. And speaking of children, I wanted to say I have a young lady of my acquaintance, Miss Ziva, and today is her natal day. And I wanted to send her my felicitations on this happy day. And I hope those of you at home will also let Ziva know that we celebrate her today.
Happy birthday, yes. All right. So our next question goes along very well with the last one. How did your children adapt to George being their new dad?
Oh, well, they were drawn to him from the very first. I remember when we were sat that evening of our introduction in the Chamberlain's parlor, Rose, who was the children's nursemaid, then brought them down to say good night. And oh, Jackie had just turned 3. And imagine, remember, the general's a tall man, his fine uniform, the Virginia regiment. But Jackie ran to him, climbed right into his lap, began to tug on the buttons of his coat. And I said, Jackie, come down from there at once. Leave poor Colonel Washington alone. And he only smiled and said, 'tis no bother. And I think it was in that very moment that I knew I had found their father. He did wish I could be more strict with my son, and I never was, I'm afraid. But he particularly doted upon my Patsy. My daughter, from an early age, began to suffer an illness that physicians call the falling sickness. And her body would be overcome by seizures and fits, I'm afraid. And the general did everything. We sought every doctor, tried every cure. And if you go and look at the general's ledgers, you'll notice a pattern. Here is a mark where he shows what he's paid for the doctor's visit. Underneath the medicines and the cost for that. And below that, why, you'll see where he's purchased a hair ribbon, or a comb, or a doll, some trifle to cheer Patsy after having been examined by a physician once more. And they adored him, and he them. We were very happy together.
Nice. So Cynthia asks, who chose the teas to be served during the day/evening? Actually, there's several questions.
Yes.
Did the general have input? Was there a choice of tea at dinner? And was that decided before the fare was served? Or did you choose when ready?
Well, most of our teas, we like both black and green teas. The brew tea is a black tea, it's very popular. When I invite company here, I'll serve the young hyson tea. It's a green tea, very light and refreshing. And I will choose that to be served. And Frank, again, our butler, will bring out all the accoutrements. I've got my tea chest here, and you put the leaves into the pot with the hot water. One scoop for each person to be served, and one more for the pot, and let that steep. And as I prepare the tea, I might ask if the guests would like one lump or two of sugar. Do they take cream? And so that is all done by myself. Part of being an excellent hostess is to honor your guests by preparing the tea for them. And we'll generally choose one or the other to be served that day under my direction. But again, Frank, our butler, will assemble everything that is needed. And the general and I are of a like mind. We like both of those teas.
Sounds delicious. So Mary asked, what is your favorite treat from your gardens at Mount Vernon? And actually, Penny asked, are the gardens still in bloom? So you can answer both of those.
Well, in the springtime and early summer, when the fresh asparagus is growing, that is my favorite vegetable to get. But I also like the raspberries. We make raspberry ice cream, so we still have ice in the ice house in June. And yes, our gardens are still in bloom. The lantana, particularly, the pretty yellow and orange and pink blossoms, but there's also a good deal of asters and the black-eyed Susans, the African marigolds. So still a great deal to see in the gardens. Grove amaranth, a plant called love lies bleeding. A good deal to see. I hope you come and enjoy them.
And Adam asks, well, he says, Lady Washington, throughout the Commonwealth, your hams are well renowned. Can you tell us a little bit about what goes into preparing them? What is your secret? If you feel comfortable sharing.
Of course. Well, fortunately, again, I had mentioned earlier that I was brought up very strict by my mother. And when I was a young girl, she began to teach me everything of butchery. It is the men that slaughter the animals, but it's the women that butcher. Again, you're carving the joint and it's been badly butchered, or it won't look very elegant at table. And so I was taught not only how to butcher, but how to use every part. We speak of the hams, but there's also the spare ribs and the jowls, everything. Waste not, want not. That's how I was raised. And it's all done in November and December. The hogs are rounded up. They run wild in the wilderness till then. And once the meat has been butchered, it's salted for 6 weeks. That draws out the moisture. That's why we must do this in wintertime. The heat of a Virginia summer would spoil the meat before it could be cured. And then it's hung in the smokehouse. And we keep a low smoky fire going in that building to further cure it. But yes, at least 6 weeks there in the salt. And if you like, when you're rounding up the hogs to bring them back, give them a good deal of acorns and other nuts to consume. It sweetens the meat a good deal. And again, not only do we serve one on table each day, I often like to keep them as gifts. So I'm glad that my hands are known. I'm very proud of them. Again, I oversee the curing of 400 hams every single year.
Excellent. And Suzanne has a good question. Did you always drink your tea hot or did you ever put it over ice?
Well, no, we've always drunk our tea hot. I don't know how I would think of an iced tea. Now we make lemonades, particularly in the hot summer months. They are nice, cool, and refreshing. Perhaps next summer, if it's as hot as it was this one, we'll try that out. But no, tea's always served hot. You generally, besides your teapot, have a kettle on a brazier or hob nearby, so there's always hot water to continue to make up more tea.
Very good. And Sarah asked, did you make your own clothes?
No, I do not. Again, I was brought up to sew and that, but I don't have the skill of a mantua maker, someone who makes gowns. In the years before the war, my seamstress was in London. Her name was Mrs. Shelbury. She had a shop on Dean Street. But there were seamstresses and mantua makers here in Virginia. Sadly, when my first husband died, Mrs. Vaughn was at that moment altering some gowns, and I had to call her back to make up morning gowns. I couldn't wait to send for morning gowns from London. And again, now we have Mrs. Brown, and there's also Mrs. Cox here in the neighborhood. So they are very skilled, and again, waste not, want not. When the style changes, you have perhaps different sleeve ruffles put on, or the front closure changed. So fortunately, we are able to keep up in the fashions here.
Nice. And we've got a couple other questions about your dresses, actually. Um, how did you stay cool in the summer when you're wearing all those petticoats or whatever you call them?
Yes, well, we tend to wear lighter weight clothing in the summer and lighter colors. And of course, you've got to be full dressed out. I would never go before company without every proper piece of clothing. A state of undress doesn't mean you're without clothing. For a lady, that might mean she appears before company without her stays on with whalebone. And so I try and oversee the worst parts of the hottest things in the summertime, do those early before the heat of the day sets in. But of course, we're rather used to it. I was born here in Virginia, but my father had come from Oxfordshire in England. Oh, he was never comfortable. He thought he had been sent to the jungles of the southern American continent when the summer came. Never much liked it, but he was always glad he had come to Virginia. So you try and stay as cool as possible.
Very good. And another clothing question, very popular today. What is your favorite piece of clothing or accessory? Do you have a different outfit for different days?
Well, I think I like laces. I have a great collection of lace, and it can be transferred from one gown to another. And my lady's maid, her name's Sal, is quite skilled in the application of them to the gowns, but also in keeping them clean. You almost think of lace like jewelry. And I have about, I'd say, a dozen gowns. Now, the gown is the garment here, this printed cotton, and the red silk is a petticoat. I can wear a purple petticoat or perhaps a white one. Sometimes the petticoat is made from the same fabric as the gown. Again, you can change out your sleeve ruffles or tuckers, the dressing around the trim and things. So you may make a various ensemble, as the French would say, with your various gowns and petticoats.
All right. And we've got actually a couple questions about the war. How did you come about gathering the wives of the soldiers to keep up hope during the war?
Well, they would come and visit. We would go in the winter time when the campaigning had mostly ceased and they were in their quarters. And many of these were very young women, Katie Green, and Lucy Knox. And, well, I wanted to do my part. I remember when I got to Boston, I had never seen anything of war, and the cannon fire would rattle the glass panes in the windows. At first, I was much frightened, but I took note of the brave people there, and I thought, I will never show that I am anxious. I will always be brave. I wanted to do that again for these young women. So I was glad to have them about. And of course, many of them were still breathing. So I'd often, when they'd leave off going back to their homes in a few months' time, I'd hear, oh, the letters of the latest little one being born. And I love families. So I was always very glad to have them by. And we knew that our courage would show to everyone there in the camp that we were all in this together.
Very good. And our other question from Barbara, how was it living without the general when he was fighting the war?
Well, in truth, we weren't separated very much. I would go every winter. We were only a few months apart at a time. And to be perfectly honest, when I returned home, I was very busy. I was overseeing not only the work to be done to keep up the house, but what more could we be produced so that we could help to provision the army? The Congress never sent as much as was needed. So could we produce more hams, more salted pork, more mutton that I could then take to the camps? Jenny and Phyllis, who spin and weave, could we produce more fabric than what was needed at Mount Vernon that I could take up? And so I busied myself with that. And of course, I also had 4 grandchildren born during the war. One of them, my second granddaughter, we christened Martha, what we call her Patty. Her mother was with us in the winter of '77, and that was the year I was waiting. It seemed it took forever to know where they would make their winter camp. But it wasn't until the 19th of December that the general wrote to me to say that they were encamped at a dreary cold place called Valley Forge. And I waited until my little Patty was born, 31st of December in '77, and within a month I was making my way north. So there was a great deal to attend to here. And so I kept myself quite busy at the times that we were separated.
So Scarlett says, we had a couple people ask this, turning back to food and tea. Mrs. Washington, could you tell us the story about Vulcan and the ham?
Well, yes, so I mentioned it. The general has been hunting dogs since he was a lad. We even bred them for Lord Fairfax at one time. And they're wonderful creatures, quite pretty to see them. And they are trained to sniff out the foxes and to chase them out. And one day it turned out that Vulcan had got into the kitchen. The hams take some hours to boil all the salt out and to cook up properly. And so the ham had been cooked and was there on the table cooling when Vulcan leapt up and grabbed the ham in his jaws and ran off with it. And I was very angry. That's a terrible waste. And of course, it takes so long. I didn't have time to have another ham boiled to serve on table. So I felt I had to go get what I could to make sure we had a bountiful board laid out. And as I said, well, there no longer are the hunting dog kennels kept near the house. They're far away, so that can't ever happen again.
Nice. A lot of people were excited about that, hearing that story again. So James asked, do you have any words of hope during this dark and trying time here, especially for families who are separated during this time as you were during the war?
Yes, I think again, now we remember the 4th day of July. It's a celebration, isn't it? Oh, we have illuminations, there are barbecues, and everyone's celebrating. But I often cast my memory back to the actual day when the Declaration was produced in July of '76. I was there in Philadelphia. I was then recovering from taking the smallpox inoculation. And when I heard the church bells ringing and I could hear people reading our Declaration of Independence, I thought, we can never go back now. Remember, we've won very few battles. In fact, the general would lose more battles in that war than he won. And as they read that document aloud, I thought, if we do not succeed, he will be the first to be taken to London and hanged for a traitor. And I remember that uncertainty even now. And I try and always take courage. I've been thinking particularly about our young people. For many of them, they miss being in their schoolroom with the school teachers. And if they get discouraged while they are learning at home, I only remember that General Washington had the same situation. His father had died, when the general was 11, and that was an end to his formal education. He was the eldest of his mother's children, and he had to help look after a younger sister, 3 younger brothers, help his mother run their farm near Fredericksburg, and he taught himself at home. In fact, I often look at the books in his library, and what a fine example of they are, someone who became a lifelong learner. So we must do as we did during the war, to always keep hope and to continue to work together for the desired outcome. And again, for the young people, I think they're doing very well. But again, if you get discouraged, remember the general did the same thing.
Thank you for that advice, Martha. We appreciate it. And I think that's all the time we have, but I saw Susan had a question. She said she misses the Mount Vernon Inn, but if you could remind us when we can see you at the inn
Yes,
again.
on the 17th of October, we are having a tea, and my friends will let you know how you can get a ticket to come and join me. We'll be right here in the inn, set apart so you won't be sat right on top of one another in a very pretty room, and we can enjoy tea and some delights from the kitchens here at Mount Vernon. So I do hope that if you're able, you'll come and join us that day. And thank you for coming to join us today, and I want to wish everyone a fine afternoon.